justice, and peace. We celebrate this session this evening, O God, that you will give us the wisdom, the insight, the knowledge, and the understanding, and the power to implement and execute. Lord God, you said your people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. Well, Lord, we ask you now to replenish that knowledge this evening, to give us right tools of understanding, to be able, Lord, to do your justice to the glory of God. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Bishop. Okay. Why are we here? We're here to get stronger, better, and wiser. I am a child of the civil rights era. Shortly after I grew up, Doctor, the Brown versus the Board of Education decision was. Then the year that I graduated Howard University, that spring, Martin Luther King was shot. So all my whole growing up period was in the civil rights movement. Thank you so much. Okay. And Medgar Evers was a camp counselor for me in the summer, in summer camp. So the civil rights era was a wonderful time, Bethel, a time of danger. My sister and I went to jail at the age of 16, trying to picket the Bijou Theater in Knoxville, Tennessee. But the time was full of richness and song and hold on, keep your eyes on the prize, hold on, hold on. Harriet Tubman said, if you hear the dogs, keep going. If you see the torches in the woods, keep going. If they're shouting after you, keep going. Don't ever stop. Keep going. If you want a taste of freedom, keep going. Empowerment, which is what we're about, begins with acquiring accurate information, a commitment to understand our interests, and a determination to pursue the best outcomes for our people. Our agenda then is to create and maintain an instrument that will serve our village as we engage the social arena and hold politicians and agency functionaries accountable. We created something we're calling Lights On, a political action committee. We call it Lights On, and the website says Lights On Now, Keith. Lights On is to move us in that direction. There's much ado about disparities, but when all is said and done, there's a lot more said than done. So Attorney General Ellison and Senator Bobby Joe Champion and our elders of His Works United have been talking for a long time about this issue of empowerment and accountability. And out of those discussions have come even this moment in time. So I wanted to ask Keith, the Attorney General, His Honor, is it His Honor or Your Eminence? Your brother. I wanted to ask Keith to share with you some of that foundational thinking about the issue of politics and segueing ultimately to an area of opportunity in terms of housing. So now I know, and let me just say, he's come here under duress in his schedule, but he's here. He may have to go shortly, but he's here. Keith, my brother.
Thank you, Reverend. And if we could just say a very strong prayer to God on behalf of the wonderful congregation that allows us to assemble in their house of worship right now. Shiloh, everybody, please put your hands together for them. And Bishop, thank you. It is not a small thing that we have a lovely, important spiritual place to meet in. Let me tell you, if I were to start a conversation with African-American people, non-immigrant right now, and I love everybody, you know that, right? I'm married to an immigrant, right? So it's not about that, but right now, if I was to talk to African-American non-immigrant people, I'd have to explain to you that there's not one single year-round organization that gathers votes, registration year-round. Now, why is that important? because you cannot build political power if you only talk to people during the election season. If I come to you and ask you to support me during the election season, Reverend Bethel, then I come back to you the next time you see us, the election season, and then the next season after that, Reverend McPhee, is election season. You might get the impression that all I really care about is so that I get to be in a paper and call myself by some fancy title. And you're thinking that's good for you. What's that going to do for me, right? And my family. So we've got to get that is what I call transactional politics. We've got to move from transactional politics to relationship-based politics. Transactional politics is when some politician who we know only wants us to vote for him and doesn't care about us otherwise comes in, asks us to vote, then we vote, and then we're waiting for when we get cut in, and maybe that happens, maybe that doesn't. Relationship-based politics is that when we're working on housing, these folks who are in office are here to talk to us and help us and help do their part. And I'm just going to tell you a secret about politics. The relationship between the community that's not in elected office and people who are in elected office is a symbiotic relationship. If you're in office, you can't get anything done unless you got community demanding it. And if you are in community and you got nobody in office, you can pound, you can march, you can scream, and nothing ever happens. So you've got to have both. Somebody in office, you got to have Senator Champion who's going to drop the bill in to say we need resources directed here. But the community has to be there to say, yes, we support him. That's what we want him to do. And if you don't support him, we're going to show up. We're going to be at the Capitol. We're going to knock every door. We're going to talk to you. We're going to rouse up the community. We're going to make our demands clear. So let me just tell you, there is no Black non-immigrant organization that does voter empowerment and mobilization year-round. It doesn't exist. They used to be Knock for a little while. Y'all remember Knock? Then they're gone. Acorn used to do a little something. But what I'm saying is we need permanent engagement, door knocking and engagement. I think the best place to seat an organization like So Now is in the Black church. Why? Because it is the most credible and enduring institution. It's the most credible and enduring. Other ones, they're kind of new, right? They're new, they come, they go. Will they be here tomorrow? We hope so. But we know from the way back till now, the Black church is there. And it's solidly there, solidly there. And I know if I'm having a tough time politically, I can come in here and get a lot of love and feel better. And if I'm doing pretty good, I can have somebody come in here and say, you ain't so hot, brother. Come on, get the ego down, you're just one of us, we need both, right? Do we need both? Do we need both, Reverend Bethel? So my point is, the Black church is this enduring institution centered on love, centered on doing what's right, understands the moral imperative. And the other thing is, what I want to talk about now. Now, I'd like to move into this question of housing. If you are trying to do almost anything, it's way, way easier to do if you have a permanent address that is yours. Housing is fundamental. Housing, where you live, determines what school district you go to. What school district you do determines your opportunities in the employment area. Your areas in the employment area determine whether or not you're going to be working just to get your next check or build wealth and generational wealth and pass it on and be able to use the wealth that you've acquired from to pass it on. There was an instant. I think it's important to understand this about housing. The United States government for literally 6 decades deliberately segregated America. The Federal Housing Administration, would y'all say it with me? The Federal Housing Administration, which insures mortgages, said that unless the deed to the house contains a restrictive covenant, we will not insure those mortgages. So you got the mortgage, you got the deed, you got the mortgage, and then you got the insurance for the mortgage, right? We won't insure it. And in fact, we're going to have maps where we're going to draw lines around the places we're not going to insure. And that's known as? Now you got redlining and you got reverse redlining. That's why black people were relegated to being renters and white people got to own homes. I'm telling you, there's a place called Levittown, New York. You ever heard of that, Levittown? Look it up. Look it up, Levittown. It was a government-supported housing project, and it was exclusively and only and radically and aggressively all white. You go to Levittown today, some of those houses are going to be $600,000. They started out, it's very cheap. They were affordable for people who got out of World War II and were soldiers. Somebody's grandchild's living in that house now. And the grandchild says, I'm not racist. Yeah, but your great-grandparents got it because they're white and mine didn't because they're not. That problem is as much a Minneapolis problem as any. And I'm telling you right now, you're worried about police brutality, you're worried about a whole lot of other crime. A lot of it is work revolves around housing. Why is it that you live in North Minneapolis or South Minneapolis? Recently, you can move out to Champlain, but that's new. Before, you couldn't move out there. You were North Side, South Side, Frogtown. Am I right? So, but what reason it was is that there's from 1937, there is a planning map that says North Minneapolis, that's the Negro slum. Building housing is an opportunity we need to move into. Housing is something that needs to be built, needs to be owned. In Minnesota, we have a greater disparity than anywhere in the country. Nationally, I think whites own their homes around 73%, and blacks own their homes around 40-some%. Not in Minnesota. Here, it's more like 24%, 78%. And the public dollar for housing gets steered to basically reinforce segregation all over again. Public money for housing steered and directed so that if you're white, you might live in a publicly subsidized unit, but I bet you not too many black people live in there. How many of y'all live in the A Mill? Right on, you know the A Mill? Y'all go down there, right? I'm talking about the one right on Main Street. The theater's there, Astor Cafe is there. The A Mill, the artist love. Man, they built that thing for millions of dollars and might have spent nearly $1 million a unit. And I don't think there's no black folks living in there. If there is, maybe one or two. They steer you to housing only here, and they build and subsidize housing for the public everywhere, but they do it based on race. Yeah. Now we need to have a housing policy that is going to make sure we have fair housing. And if you don't do it, it's not going to be done. Last word I want to say. There's a law of politics. This is like a law of nature. I'm going to give you a law of politics. This is a law of politics. No matter how meritorious something is, if there's no constituency to push it, it will not happen. Here's the other side of that law. No matter how stupid and backward and wrong something is, if there's a group of people to fight for it, it will happen. That's a law of politics. Two laws of politics. What is the lesson? The system's not moral or immoral. The system is amoral, meaning it responds to lobbying. It responds to pushing. You don't push it, it doesn't push. You don't move it, it doesn't move. And if you think we have been victims of discrimination in these United States ever since its founding and before, and we have a moral claim to be cut in, that and $3.50 will get you a cup of coffee. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. And so it's time to grab onto this housing thing with political organization that we're talking about tonight and move it along. Please forgive me. I do have to leave, but I love y'all and I'm with this effort 100%.
My man. Amen. You know, thank you, Keith, for being who you are, for beginning this dialogue with us, continuing to walk with us on this road. We got to make a difference. Senator Champion intended to be here. He may yet come. But one of the things he often says, if you aren't at the table, you're probably on the menu. So what we are talking about ultimately is the creation and the movement of a new organization, a community action organization. We've already incorporated it. It's called Lights On. It is a political action entity, a 501c4. It's not a C3, so your contributions into Lights On are not tax deductible, but Lights On is empowered to lobby, to raise up issues, and to support issues that are important to us. Would you please see that, put up the website? We're here on a broader issue. The broader issue we have is awareness. If you quoted Bishop as he came in, quoted, my people are destroyed, Mac loves to say, for lack of knowledge. So we're about, first of all, enlightenment, awareness, and we're about mobilization, and then we're about accountability. Now, when Keith said there is no African-American entity that year-round is focused, we want to stop that now. We want to change that now, okay? So this is a website. The website you can get to, www.lightsonnow.org. www.lightsonnow.org. The name of the entity is Lights On, but the website is www.lightsonnow.org. And as you see, it begins with saying that the time has come for better informed, more intentional, strategic action by African American people. That's now, that's this time. We got to advance to these lofty goals of the beloved community and fellowship and justice. But Lights On is an instrument to achieve effective community engagement in a sustainable manner. A channel open to every member of our village interested in the forward movement of our people is a mission spearheaded, please hear this, by the African American Church. There's pastors all over this place. There's pastors all over this place. Reverend McAfee, Reverend Gonzalez, Reverend Benetti, Reverend Flint, Reverend Robinson, Reverend Dr. Hightower, Reverend Hazlett, Reverend Coles, Reverend Dr. Patterson, Reverend Elijah McDavid, Reverend Andre Dukes, Reverend Bishop Richard Howell. You ain't no Reverend. But you do have a congregation. We're glad to hear you, Tito. Reverend David McGee, Reverend Carmen Means, Reverend Erica. We're talking about focusing this thing on the African American church, but it's not just the church. Did I say Reverend Bethel? Listen, the church is at the core. That's our roots. But we need everybody. Reverend, okay. And so the everybody is everybody. That means that the Charles can be part of this. one of the, let's see, would you go please to About Us? I think it's About Us. So there you see that's Cornell Moore and Jane Khalifa, who spoke to a group of Black up-and-coming folk maybe 15, 20 years ago. In that group that they were speaking to at Stair Step at something we call the table, there was a Melvin Carter at the table. There was a Keith Ellison at the table. There was a Bobby Joe Champion at the table. There was a Shantara Hari at the table. None of them were in office at the time. But there was a starting to talk about things back then. Would you roll down, please? That happens to be a picture of the Elders Council. You see the gathering of the preachers. But roll down a little further. And it just I want the board of directors of Lights On. Elder Stacy Smith is the presiding elder of the AME Church in the state of Minnesota. Dr. David Hamler happens to be the sire archon of Omicron Boule. Reverend Carmen Means, a community activist and a powerful preacher. Dr. Clarence Hightower, he actually earned his doctorate. You all know that? It's a darn doctorate. Ms. Devonna Pittman, she's a force. She's a force. She's here with a young lady that's running for sheriff of Hennepin County. Your name again is? Say again. Will you say it again? Sawana Kirkland. Amen. Who is with us on tonight. Bishop Fred Washington, Reverend Dr. James Thomas, who will be here shortly, the Reverend Jerry McAfee, Mrs. Kelly Tolbert Robinson. That's Kelly who runs the Black Nurses. The Tolbert, I don't know if you knew this, Shamika. The Tolbert there is the Tolbert who was the head of Liberia. We got some roots. Okay. Who else is on this thing? Miss Linda Sloan, who's the head of the Americans for Blacks for African Heritage. Something, help me, somebody. Something like that. Reverend Richard Coleman, Bishop Richard Howell, Reverend Ronnie Patterson, who's the president of the State Baptist Convention, and Mr. Tyrone Terrell, amen. Tyrone Terrell, who's the head of the African American Leadership Forum. There'll be others added, but the point is, it's churches at the core, but the entire community, as it ought be. Would you go to, I guess at this point, well, scroll down a little further. I just like this quote again from Harriet Tubman. If you hear the dogs, keep going. If you see the torches in the woods, keep going. If there's shouting after you, keep going. Don't ever stop. Keep going. If you want a taste of freedom, keep going. We have to do this. This is a boo-boo moment. Would you go to the donate page? The donate page. Make a donation. Now, let me say this to you, because we're going to illustrate how easy that is. But I had talked to the preachers at some of our comings together and said, listen, if each of you in your congregations reach out and get 20 folk who said they'll do $5 a month into building a war chest. And if we just, listen, you know what happens if you do $5 a month? You start feeling like you own something. You start feeling like you're a part of something. This is not an elite thing. This is our thing, about the entire community. And the more folk that are involved in it, Kevin Lacey, I don't go send your money in from Ghana. We grow. And the stronger we grow. So we have the ability to lobby and analyze issues with this. Okay, so Sita, we want to do a demonstration of how easy it is to donate. So the top, would you please? Okay, so Sita's making a donation. She put in her email address. I should give you the microphone. Huh? You can feel this. You don't have to see, you can feel this. Okay. Okay. So come down to payment. Eventually, you'll make your way to an opportunity that's either PayPal or credit card. And just make the donation. And I know Reverend Patterson at one point was asking him, what if the church just decides it's going to gather in any way you want to do it? Let's just do it. Some folk may go big. Hey, that works. But if it's a $5 ready, drip, 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 we'll fool around and get a flood going. Thank you so much. Ownership makes a difference. We're the ones we've been waiting for. So, as I said to you, the broader issue is empowerment. The broader issue is how do we get to be aware? How do we mobilize? How do we energize? But we have a target of opportunity that gives us a chance to make the point we're really trying to make. Keith mentioned it earlier, housing. Housing is an area of great import. And I'm going to ask Professor Myron Orfield, who is a true believer. He's a true believer. He's been in this war a long time and written articles. He's been a consultant to the Obama administration. He goes all over the country testifying in these cases of civil liberties, whatever. Myron is a true believer. So he sent me a little thing today saying he just wrote an article, a new article, The Neo-Segregationists, right? And so I said, oh, well, let me print it off. After page 952, who's supposed to read this? Oh, you know what I mean? I read the headlines. But I want Myron to come, and he may want to reiterate some of the things he said on a high scale about this arena, Myron. But also, would you really zero in on the target of opportunity we have now with the case that's working its way through Met Council, whatever, and allow us to understand this better? Dr. Myron Orfield.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I have some slides I think some of you've seen before. I'm going to try to sum up my long articles, which are too long to read, but it's about a pattern that I call neo-segregation. And Minneapolis is becoming, and the Twin Cities is becoming racially segregated faster than any other place in the country. And segregation is not a thing about choice. It's not, one of the things that happens right now is you've got a $300 million a year subsidized housing industry in the Twin Cities. $300 million a year. It has 8,000 employees that make $70,000 or more a year, 91% white. They're the affordable housing industry. And they say it doesn't matter that Minneapolis has gotten segregated. Everybody wants it that way. We've decided to do that. We've decided to be segregated. It doesn't matter that we have the worst mortgage lending discrimination between blacks and whites in the country because nobody really cares. And it's about credit history anyway. We're not going to get into that. It doesn't matter whether school districts can draw sharp boundaries between white and black people all the time, and no lawful entity supervises and protects the rights because everybody wants it that way. At every civil rights hearing, there is a black person that stands in front of all the white people behind them that make money, and they testify, oh, we like segregation. We like it the way it is. It's not about segregation, it's about choice. We all want to live separately. It doesn't matter whether the all-white schools in South Minneapolis send most of their kids to the best colleges in the country, and the poor segregated schools in Roosevelt and North Minneapolis, most of the young men are dropping out and not following that path. That when schools are integrated, they make a big difference. They said it doesn't matter because nobody wants it that way. There's 2 or 3 people, they represent the black community. Every hearing I go to, 100 hearings, they're there at every hearing. At every decision, when they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars, they're there and say that everything's all right. There's a few black people in the largest foundations and the largest housing entities in the state. They are figureheads in front of a massive, highly profitable white industry, and they say everything's fine. Now, I'm a lawyer, a law professor, and I study these trends. And I see them from above. I see the figures. I look at the statistics. I see that we have the fastest segregating schools in the country. I see that's bad. I see that we have the greatest and most rapid growing racial inequality. I think that's bad. I see that we have very good civil rights laws that we're ignoring and nobody does anything. That's bad. And I go testify, and there's 2 or 3 or 4 black representatives representing the black community. They say everything's fine. He's a pointy-headed law professor. What he says doesn't make any difference. Everything's fine. But everything isn't fine. And since George Floyd died, and George Floyd was a symbol of a much deeper inequality. It was about police brutality, but it was about some of the most great inequality in education and housing and opportunity here than any place in the country. That police brutality was a spark that lit off 2,000 demonstrations in the United States and 2,000 demonstrations in Europe, and made the whole country think about it, and brought $100 million of charity to the region. And what did it do? It built more entrenched segregation and inequality. It didn't go to any black-led organizations. It went to these powers that be that run these massive, profitable housing industries that say to the banks, these organizations, they get hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars from philanthropy and the federal government, and they say to the banks that give them a little money, everything's fine. We're not going to push you. The city of Baltimore sued Wells Fargo, and the city of Memphis sued Wells Fargo. And as soon as they got past about 2 weeks of discovery, they settled for $150 million each in those cases, and they should have gotten billions. They got $150 million because they were brought by private plaintiffs and they got their attorney's fees and left town. They never took it to the end. They never settled. They never admitted liability. There's the worst mortgage lending discrimination in the country. I've got some slides I'm going to show you about what happened, but I think one of the things to realize is the laws are good here. There's a very good attorney general here. There's a very good system of courts here, but there's an incredibly corrupt system of housing and of schools and of development that has been making millions of dollars promoting a racially segregated and unequal society. And they bring a few black people to these meetings to say everything's all right, but there's none of these. Of these 8,000 people in the poverty housing industry, 91% of them are white. And all of the people, 86% of the people that lead these organizations are. They live in the nicest neighborhoods in the region. They go to the best schools in the region. They say everything's fine. Let me show some slides if you can, if I have a PowerPoint projector. Let's go to the first slide. One of this just shows how fast segregated schools have grown here. And there's two places in the country that are kind of alike Minneapolis and St. Paul racially. Seattle and Portland, Oregon have about the same percentage of black people on a metropolitan level, about the same percentage of Latino people, about the same percentage of poor people. We've got 90 or so schools that are more than 90% non-white and poor. We got 90. Portland's got 2, and Seattle's got 20, and they have 1 million more students. We decided in 1998 to stop enforcing our school integration rules. It wasn't the Republicans that decided to do this. It was Hubert Humphrey, the son of the great civil rights leader, who decided integrating the schools is too hard politically. I won't win the election as governor politically if I keep integrating the schools. And when he was attacked by the Republican candidate, he decided he wouldn't integrate the schools anymore. He decided instead of a system that favored racially integrated schools, he wrote an opinion that said the schools, he said it was presumptively illegal if people wanted to voluntarily integrate the schools, and the problem started there. Move to the next slide. Let's look at the schools, the neighborhoods. Keep going. This is 1940. This shows the pattern and the growth of segregation, what Keith was talking about. At first, segregation was shaped by racially restrictive covenants. Minneapolis abolished racially restrictive covenants, one of the first places in the country. It did it because we had strong civil rights leaders. We had some of the greatest black civil rights leaders in the country here too. Roy Wilkins went to the University of Minnesota, and he would lead the national NAACP during its glory period from the 1950s to the late 70s. He would be one of the founders of the March on Washington. He grew up in St. Paul. He went to the University of Minnesota. Whitney Young, who would be the head of the National Urban League during the 1960s and 70s, went to the University of Minnesota and went to school here in this area. Clarence Mitchell, who was the head of the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, the great umbrella organization of national civil rights organizations. During that period of the 64, 65, and 68 Act, he came from here. And it was not just Hubert Humphrey, who was a great civil rights leader, but 3 of the greatest black civil rights leaders in American history came from the Twin Cities and passed here some of the best civil rights laws in the country, which we are ignoring. Let's take a look. This is the growth of segregated neighborhoods. Just flip through these slides. 40, this is 50, keep going, 60, 70, 80, 90, 2000, 2001, 2010, 2001 more, I think. Go so back. So this pattern of segregation has grown here, and it's been shaped not by choices, but by laws. A black family that earns $172,000 a year in this metropolitan area is less likely to qualify for a prime loan than a white household that earns 40. This is across all the banks, all the data. It's the worst discrimination in the country between blacks and whites. And they say to these banks, Wells Fargo, who settled a case in Baltimore, who settled a case in Memphis when the city brought these cases right away. They settled them before you could even get the evidence of guilt. In that deposition, there were 25 depositions of Wells Fargo employees, and they said in their depositions, they said there were 2 kinds of loans, one that went to regular people and one that went to what they called mud people. And that's what they said in their emails. The black neighborhoods, the poor neighborhoods, they called them in their emails mud people. And these were the depositions of their employees that showed that systematically into the Black and Latino neighborhoods of the region were steered subprime loans for a decade. And those subprime loans took the money that people had. It took their equity. They were not only subprime first loans, but they were subprime equity loans. And they ripped the wealth that was built over 20 years from people, and nobody did anything about it. And these neighborhoods still, these disparities are still there. Now, what do they say the banks say when you say, why is it that a Black household that earns $172,000 a year is less likely to qualify for a prime loan than a white household that earns 40? And they say, well, we have data from the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act. And they say, well, we have data from credit histories. Our credit history data explains the difference. And we say, I'm a professor at the University of Minnesota. I'd like to see your credit history data. I'll keep it confidential. And they say that's proprietary. We're not going to give you the credit history data. Now, in these two lawsuits in Memphis and Baltimore, these lawyers, the city of Memphis, the city of Baltimore, each spent $150,000 in discovery. And the federal court said, you have to show the credit history data. And as soon as the federal court said they have to show the federal credit history data, Wells Fargo settled those cases as fast as they could. There's two Federal Reserve banks in the country that got that credit history data, the Boston Federal Reserve and the Philadelphia Federal Reserve. They forced the banks to provide that credit history data to them because they have the power to do that. They have to do that. The banks are subject to the Federal Reserve's mighty regulation. And the Federal Reserve, when they got that credit history data, they said, how much of this disparity did it explain? It explained 25% of the disparity. So it didn't explain anything. It was just pure, cold-hearted, clear-eyed, fully embraced, fully understood, total discrimination, total redlining. So a Black person, no matter how much money they made, no matter how well they did, no matter what they did, they were going to experience that mortgage lending discrimination, and nobody was going to do anything about it. The second thing that happens to Black families is they move into the housing market. Everybody says these Black people that represent the housing industry, that represent the charter schools, they say, no Black people want to live in the suburbs. Not one. Not one Black person wants to live by Lake Harriet. Not one Black person wants to live in Edina. Not one Black person wants to live in Deep Haven or Minnetonka. We know, because we know all the Black people, and they don't want to do that. Well, the reality is that 60% of the Black people live in the suburbs. And if you look at Black families in the Twin Cities that make more than the median income, 65% live in the suburbs. And if you look at Black married families with children, 75, 80% live in the suburbs. So the reality is, if Black people don't want to live in the suburbs, why are 75% of the families with children living in the suburbs? These groups come, hearing after hearing, they say, no Black people want to live anywhere near white people. They just don't want to do it. They'd feel uncomfortable. They testify in public hearings. They say, our children have to go to entirely Black schools because they'd feel bad if they went to schools with white kids. They say this at public hearings all over the time. Well, anyway, when a Black family moves to the suburbs, a real estate agent doesn't give them the same choice they give a white family. Time after time, a Black family moves to the suburbs, they get shown a part of the suburbs where the schools are already a little bit diverse, where there is some diversity there. And they show the white family of the same income, education, and credit history, a totally different suburb where the schools are dramatically whiter. They take people into the housing market, they have testers, they match pairs of people. They have a Black family and a white family, and they have the same credentials, they have the same income, they have the same credit history, they went to the same schools, and they're taught, for purposes of this test, to ask the real estate agent exactly the same question. They say, I moved here from out of town. I don't know anybody here, but I'd like to live in the nicest neighborhood that I could live in with the best schools. And they systematically show the white household and the Black household a totally different neighborhood. The Black families get shown Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center and parts of Maple Grove. They get shown East Bloomington, Burnsville, parts of the suburbs straight south. The white families get shown Edina and Plymouth and Minnetonka and the whiter suburbs, systematic. What happens when they stop showing white families a Brooklyn Park or a Brooklyn Center? What happens when real estate agents don't show white families those neighborhoods anymore? Well, white families compose 25% of the total housing market. And when they are totally withdrawn from a Brooklyn Park, a Brooklyn Center, a part of Maple Grove, a part of East Bloomington, a part of Burnsville, when those white families are totally withdrawn, when the real estate agents cut them off, when they won't show them those neighborhoods, the price falls. When you take 25% out of a housing market, you take it out, the law of supply and demand, the price falls. It always falls. And when they start that steering, those black families who paid more to live in the suburbs than they should have, they paid more for an integrated housing market. When the real estate agents stop showing the white families those neighborhoods, the black families lose their equity. They always lose their equity. What's the difference between white wealth and black wealth? It's housing. And how is that created? It's created by real estate agents and banks. What happens when the real estate agents stop showing white families those neighborhoods? The banks look at it and they see the prices going down and they pull the credit down. So if you take a look at mortgage lending, it's not only withdrawn from North Minneapolis, it's drawn from Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center, East Bloomington, and all those places. Yep.
Would you spend a little time now specifically talking about this case?
Yes, I will.
And the opportunities.
I will. There's a case right now, and it's right before the courts. It's before the Biden administration. It's a case called Micah versus Metropolitan Council. And it's a case where civil rights plaintiffs, the city of Brooklyn Park, the city of Brooklyn Center, the city of Richfield, and Micah, Metropolitan Interfaith Congregations for Affordable Housing, a multiracial civil rights church-based organizations, have sued the Met Council and the State Housing Finance Agency, alleging housing discrimination. And this case was brought under federal civil rights rules that were created by President Obama. The federal disparate impact rule and the federal affirmatively furthering fair housing rule that enforced the meaning of the 1968 Fair Housing Act. The Biden administration has told the Met Council that they believe that they are on the verge of making a finding of discrimination by the Met Council for all these things that I've told you about, by the placement of affordable housing and all the other things. And it's very likely that the plaintiffs are going to win this case. And what's going to happen when they win this case? Nothing, unless somebody gets involved. They're going to paper victory. There's another case that's coming down. It's called Cruz Guzman versus State of Minnesota. It's about school segregation. It's before the Minnesota Supreme Court. We have very good laws and we have very good judges, and it's likely that all of this inequality and division is going to result in the court finding a violation of the Constitution. So in both these cases, you're going to have judges applying law, and they're going to find clear evidence of racial discrimination in housing and schools. And the question is, are those settlements going to be meaningful? Are those settlements going to change the direction of a $300 million a year in housing? There's $7 billion of money in stimulus for highways and housing construction. The state of Minnesota is $8 billion in stimulus. Right now, all that money is set to go to white-led organizations that not only believe in charging twice too much for these units and making huge profits, but they believe in maintaining a clear wall of segregation. They don't want to challenge real estate agents. They don't want to talk to banks because banks help fund their not-for-profit organizations. But in these two cases, there's a chance to raise hell about this. And it's not going to happen with a bunch of professors. It's not going to happen when every hearing, there's 3 or 4 black people that represent these huge housing and school interests that say that everything's fine. There needs to be some engagement. Now, in the United States, whenever there's been progress on civil rights, whether it was before the Civil War or in the movement of the 1960s, it was always led by the black church. Nothing ever happened unless the black church got involved. Brown versus Board of Education sat in the books for 10 years until Martin Luther King started raising hell. Nothing happened. But after the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, about a third of all the African-American kids and white kids in the country went to integrated schools, and it happened fast. Now that's coming apart now. Employment gains after the 64 and 65 acts went up. After the 65 voting rights, voting skyrocketed. After the 68 Act, King's last great movement, nothing much happened because he died and the movement fell apart. But that's the greatest of all the laws. The greatest of all the civil rights laws is the 1968 Fair Housing Act. It's the most powerful. It's the clearest. The courts have upheld it with the greatest strength. And President Obama was the first president that ever gave it rules and definition. This is a powerful law, and you have a powerful case, and you have powerful injustice here, and something needs to happen.
So, two things. One is that further clarity around this opportunity. And we are going to develop strategy to engage around this opportunity. Okay, so I want to allow time for a couple of questions to Professor Orfield, and then we have one final presentation, very important. But Dr. Hightower? He's got a microphone, please.
Myron, you talked about a paper victory, Met Council versus Michael.
Yeah.
Micah. So what's on the other side of the paper victory, and how do we get there?
Well, I think that one of the things would be is for this organization to develop a series of demands that they want the federal government to address. Now, the cases that Micah, the basic cases before the court are whether they're going to build any affordable housing in white neighborhoods or not. And right now they're building virtually none. All the affordable housing in the suburbs is going to the poorest suburbs. So if you guys don't get involved, it's going to be about shifting a few affordable housing units to white neighborhoods. There's going to be nothing about mortgage lending that gets solved. There's going to be nothing about racial steering that gets solved. There's going to be nothing about this $150 million a year goes into North Minneapolis, near South Minneapolis, and Frogtown. None of it goes to Black-led organizations, maybe a tiny bit, maybe 10% of it. None of it gives any jobs to Black people. It gives a few to Latino people, non-union labor. It's almost entirely to white households. This money, part of the Fair Housing Act says part of the money should open up the white areas, part of the money should rebuild the poor areas. But the money that rebuilds the poor areas should be led by that community. That's what the law says. And the people that are getting the money, they live over by the lakes, by me. They live in the suburbs. They go to the best schools of the region, and they have a few Black people who work for them that say everything's fine. We like it that way. But that's not what the law requires. The law says it should go to community organizations, that should build up the community, that should go to Black-led organizations, should train African-American workers to create jobs, and these entities should be led by people that live here and work here, and the churches are perfect places for that.
Dr. Bethel?
And so, thank you for bringing this good white professor, good white man, and everything else. I'm talking community and Babington, and to all of us, what's the game plan? We've heard it. I've heard you everywhere. Now let's get the game plan together. What is our game plan? It won't be a game, but here we got to get it done.
Amen. So let me say we're working together with Myron to understand the leverage points. Clarence is involved, a little subcommittee. We're looking for, did Mac leave? Okay, but anyway, so we're going to be working together, the policy board, to identify the leverage points. See, this is a great opportunity. As Myron outlined, this case is winding its way forward. It would have come to conclusion with us just viewing from the side and something trivial occurring. But now we intend to engage. We intend to appear before the Met Council in every place that we can identify an opportunity to raise our voices. And what we want to have as an outcome of that is a couple of things. One is, as was mentioned before, the issue of affordable housing has, thank God for Senator Champion, our hero, coming in. But affordable housing, first of all, we do need affordable housing in the inner city, in Minneapolis and St. Paul, for sure, good quality. We also need to have the opportunity of affordable housing in the suburbs. Black folk ought to have a right to live wherever they want with affordable. So that's a two-edged issue. Beside that, though, the economic issue of who's building them. What are the entities that are doing it? And who is working for them? You know, and so we absolutely want to raise both those issues to high heaven. And we have entities like Build Wealth Minnesota, the stuff that MAC is doing, the African-American, Twin Cities African-American Land Trust. We're looking to get Black developers, Black contractors as a part of the solution on this. The economics is as critical as anything else. So we are, Dr. Bethel, planning to pursue these matters in an informed way with you know, and the other thing that Professor Orfield mentioned is we have a good attorney general. We have a good attorney general who is also mindful of these things. We got Senator Champion. We got guiders to lead us to the places we want to drink. Yes, Mike, and then, Mike, and then Dr. Robinson.
Well, you talked about all the money going to these white guys making 70,000 or more. Who's channeling the money back into the community, and who's challenging the exodus of the money to these white communities? Where's the litigation to bring it back to where it belongs?
Well, I mean, this is one of the tragedies. Is there isn't a strong civil rights organization right now in the region. There isn't anybody. There's a few lawyers that are bringing these cases on their own, but the major housing organizations is one called the Housing Justice Center, which supports us. They say they're the civil rights organization, but they support a rigidly segregated vision of the Fair Housing Act. They believe in the rigidly racial status quo. So they're hardly a civil rights organization. There aren't anybody, and that there's people that are challenging it. The laws are really good. It's amazing how far these cases have gone, because they've basically been financed through charity. But the violations are so terrible that the courts are going to find them guilty. And I think what Keith is, Keith one time, he said, Abraham Lincoln was not elected to free the slaves. He was elected to keep the Union. He was forced to free the slaves by the abolitionist movement and the church-based movement. He was forced. They changed the country under him. Lyndon Johnson was not elected to pass the civil rights law. Martin Luther King made him pass the civil rights law, forced that issue. And without those issues being forced, even our friends like Keith, who is the finest attorney general in the United States, he's not going to be able to do it by himself. He can't create the force to change this and mediate it. He has to have someone pushing him.
Amen. Dr. Robinson, and then come on up, Marvin.
I'm finna ask a crazy question here. I keep hearing the word affordable housing. Where? As far as I can see, there is no such thing as affordable housing. Our folks are priced out of the market.
That's right.
I'm looking for somewhere to go right now, and what keeps coming up as affordable is 150, 200,000.
Yep.
And to me, that ain't gonna help my folk.
No.
They need something a little cheaper than that.
What the poverty housing industry is doing now is they're using all of the money for affordable housing, and they're building units, and they're charging the government in all of its branches $500,000 or $600,000 or $700,000 a unit. They're pocketing as a profit $150,000 or $200,000 per these units, and they're putting these units out that are built 100% with government money at the market rate rent of the neighborhood. Sometimes when they build these units in a poor neighborhood, they have the highest rents in the neighborhood. And these people, when the government, these white developers, the poverty housing industry, they own the units. So there's a 3-person partnership. They built 3,200 units in South Minneapolis over 20 years. They're worth $70 million, these white developers who support segregation. And when they figured out how to screw the poor people in the poor neighborhoods, they took the same money and they started to build artist lofts. And instead of building 600,000, they spent 800,000 per unit. It's like the Pillsbury Ale Mill. And those units, they priced them so they fit within the statute, but they're too expensive for a voucher. And those units, the Pillsbury Ale Mill, the government paid those white poverty housing industry developers $700 million to build the Pillsbury Ale Mill. In 10 years, it's going to belong to them. Lock, stock, and barrel, no mortgage, no rent restrictions. And it'll be a wealthy building. They built 4 buildings, these guys, that cost as much as the Viking Stadium. They're going to give these white developers $1 billion of the money that was for the poor.
Thank you. My name is Marvin Smith, and I am the president of the National Association of Minority Contractors. So I want everyone to know that we have that type of representation here this evening. We have somewhere around 30 members that do plumbing, electrical work, and everything in between. In fact, we have in our association the ability to do all or most of any new housing development that is taking place. So we can reach scale to be, I think, a very significant entity in this whole enterprise to make this happen. So I just wanted to let people know that we are here and that we are capable of being an entity that brings this ideal, this vision forward. Thank you.
That's a very important part. And if you look at the poverty housing industry, a big foundation asked them to take a look at their diversity. The McKnight Foundation asked the poverty housing industry to look at their diversity. Every year they measured it, got whiter, and they stopped doing it after about 5 years. It moved from about 80% white to about 90% white, and they stopped even keeping track of it because it was so white. And these groups, you have 2 or 3 black people that testify in every hearing, but almost everybody that works for them is white. They almost all live in the nicest neighborhoods in the city, and they argue that they are serving the interests of the black community fully and completely, and no one else needs to do a thing. Yeah.
Thank you, Marvin. But you're right, Marvin. This is a whole solution thing we have to come at it. Every aspect of our community. I want David McGee. Thank you, David McGee. Would you come because this is a broad arena, this housing arena, and there are solutions as well as challenges. And I want David to share a little bit something on the upside in terms of solution. Myron, thank you so much. We continue to work together. Amen. David is the founder, CEO of an organization called Build Wealth Minnesota. I'm proud to say he's a friend and he's doing some great work.
Thank you, Babington. No, it's a little late, so I'll try to be quick here. But anyway, we have good information. Professor Build Wealth Minnesota is located here in North Minneapolis. Been there for 13 years on the corner of Plymouth and Penn Avenue. And we've been working to get families into home ownership, black families, primarily for the last 20 years. We've gotten over 3,000 families into home ownership. We're a community development financial institution, and so we are also a housing developer. So we've been developing houses and trying to keep, I heard the affordable word, trying to keep them affordable and trying to find subsidies and funding to do that, to keep families in the home ownership. So since 2005, I have been working with a group of folks, frantically to address the housing disparities. And when we started, the black homeownership rate was 32% in 2005. It's 19% in the city of Minneapolis. It's 16% in the city of St. Paul. So it's going the other way. And we're sitting here in an area where U.S. Bank and Wells Fargo have very big footprints. And Wells Fargo has more mortgages than any bank in the world for residential every year in a row. This is one of their biggest footprints. And they haven't made a lot of investment in this area as it relates to disparities. They're trying now to do something nationally, but we have been effectively working on getting families into home ownership, black families. And I heard you mention Seattle and Portland here. And Seattle and Portland over the last 10 years, they have a very similar footprint as it relates to black families and disparities as we do here in the state of Minnesota. And over the last 10 years, the housing prices are soaring. In Seattle, the median house price is $700,000+. In Portland, Oregon, which is similar to here, is around $400,000. Minneapolis is at 300 and climbing. At this stage, at the same rate, if things continue to go at the rate they are right now, based on the income disparities of black families, we will totally be priced out of the market of home ownership, period. And so we started building houses in the north side. Houses were $190,000 in 2015. That was our first house we built. The houses that we just finished and completed in late December, $270,000. So in just 5 years, the price went up $80,000 for the exact same identical house. And so we're using a bunch of subsidies and a bunch of opportunities to get families into home ownership. Time is of the essence. And I hear what you're saying, but time is of the essence for us to start doing some stuff. So over the last year, we've been working on an initiative to try to close the disparity gap by 15%, hopefully set the pathway that it may close by in some of our lifetimes while we're here, but most likely it's not going to close in my lifetime. But we've got to move it the other way. And so we started an initiative to close the gap by 15% over the next 5 to 7 years. I don't think we have too much more time after that because the prices are not going to be there. And so we're doing everything we can to do that. You mentioned this lending piece. I've been a banker for 39 years, been an underwriter who is the one who decides whether or not you actually get a home. The underwriter decides that. I've been training underwriters that are underwriting all over the world. And the one thing that we don't really pay attention to is that, as you were mentioning it, the underwriting criteria for lenders has been created over 90 years ago. And how many Black families were buying homes 90 years ago? The underwriting criteria and guidelines have not changed for over 90 years. So it lets you know that there's a system that's been in place for home ownership for white people that hasn't changed for 90 years. So that lets you know that the possibilities of discrimination, the possibilities of continued disparities is going to continue. And so what we've done, we've created an initiative called 9,000 Equities. And so it is our goal to get 9,000 Black families into 9,000 homes for 9,000 families to create 9,000, we're calling it legacies. And where we're going with this is we created a loan product that is a little more culturally sensitive, not Black money, not free money, but it's going to be culturally sensitive to some of the needs of Black families. And so we've done it in 2014. We created it, did it for 2 years. It got suspended. And so we're actually doing it again now. We raised $100 million to get this started. And so we have been doing education at Build Wealth, Minnesota. Many of your families here, you mentioned a number of pastors in the room. Many of the families of your congregation have been through our program and have successfully came out. We're Build Wealth, Minnesota. And so it's God who gives power to build wealth. We've been teaching the families about systems, a lot of stuff you're talking about. If we don't have, I heard it earlier, we perish because of lack of knowledge. If we don't understand the systems that you're talking about, we're going to perish. And so we're teaching families the intricate details of these systems, getting people in a position to be sustainable homeowners that can grasp the legacy of equity, utilizing equity. If we don't get families in homes now when they're at the $300,000 range, 5 years from now, they're probably going to be at 500. So by helping families buy today, our families will have the $200,000 worth of equity that sets a legacy for their family for generations. Oh, and we also have linked into Section 8. Section 8, there's a program that's been going on since 1989 that allows for families that are in Section 8 to use their Section 8, the payment they use for Section 8 to go towards home ownership. For some reason, they stopped using that as a tool. We have revived the tool. And so we're going to be getting families that are on Section 8 into home ownership using their Section 8 payment as a mortgage payment. And so all of this stuff is going on. We raised, like I said, about $100 million. We have Senator Champion in the back who's been helping us. He's got he's been helping us for the last several years, providing us funding to be able to do the work that we do. He has a Senate File 3427, which he's trying to help us get money to kind of build the loan pool so we can help families. So it's a revolving loan pool. We have a bank that's buying the loans at the end after we do them, and they're going to continue to recycle that year after year. So it is our goal to do 9,000. We're going to start out about 1,000 families a year. for the first 3 years, then about 1,500 a year after that. We're hoping that we're going to be able to get as many partners and as much funding and support to make this go even more aggressive. So some great work is going on already. We closed the first family in January. I think we're up to about 150 already this year. And so it is on fire. We need all of your support. This is something like never happened before. We've got a really good group of folks that are helping us do this. And it's going quite well right at this point. Thank you, Babton.
There's some brochures in the back. Did you know they're right back there? There are brochures about this 9,000 equities if anybody wants them. So I want to ask Senator Champion to come up, please. Oh, yeah, Jamil.
Hello, everybody. Hello. We need more Black developers. To everything that you've mentioned, Mr. McGee, we both testified yesterday in regards to the Jamil Ford, the owner of Mobilized Design and Architecture. We believe in bringing beauty, dignity, and value through architecture design. I'm also a developer leading a project, Baldwin Square, that was led by the support of Bobby Joe Champion. He has placed a bill on the table right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Champion. Right now, there's a bill at the House, Bill 2976. It looks like it will carry in the House. However, we're going to need support at the Senate. Both David McGee and I was able to testify yesterday. It went from a $10 million fund with the push for a $50 million raise and push for that fund. What that fund will do is support developers of color, specifically in urban environments, to begin looking at how we view and how we want to see change within our community. If we don't do it from within, as being the developers that Myron had mentioned earlier, we will lose. We need to be at the table, Mr. Champion, not on the menu. Thanks a lot.
Amen. I want to thank again Senator Champion, who has come from the halls of Congress, and just want to say hello because you're that important.
Hello. No, let me just say that first of all, I want to thank Babington and His Works United for all this great work. Thank you, Professor Orfield. You are just a great resource. Thank you to NAMC. The issue of home ownership is something that I've been fighting and that I'll continue to fight for because I believe it to be very important. And I think the layers that you've talked about when we think in terms of who's building, who's identifying, we have been working to have a development fund for us, right? Also, a lot of work around the 9,000 homes. David McGee is a great jewel in our community as well. And I believe that home ownership is the first step to building wealth and creating that legacy that we are all talking about, but we have to be very serious about it, and serious about it even when we think in terms of who's building those homes, who's acquiring the property, because all that wealth is going outside of our community. In fact, I said to a group of people that when you think about those entities who end up getting money from us to renovate the home or build it, and then they take the money that we have put forward and then price the house at such a rate where you can't afford it, but then we use all these other governmental programs in order to build wealth for someone else. And I was pleased to also go with Jamil Ford to look at busboys and poets, because I think there's a number of developments that we should think about in real time and figure out ways to support each other. So I also like, lastly, to also mention In my office, I always say we are a team. So Shamika is here as well. And I'm so thankful for the work that she does in order to make sure I can keep track of all of these things that we are working on from day to day. So things that are going on in the House, I'm the companion in the Senate. Chair Noor and I are working very closely together, as well as Chair Fu Lee and all the others. And we are changing the paradigm and the mindset. And like David McGee says, every year, every time the budget comes up, I got Bill Wealth, Minnesota in there, right? They try to take it out every single time. I have to then fight about it every single year. That's why I say politics is a full contact sport. It is not for the weak, right? You got to be willing to throw some sharp elbows when you need to. And sometimes I do it without you even knowing, because I'm not trying to brag about it. It's just that that's the kind of work and commitment that it will take. And as Jamil Ford says, if you're not at the table, then you'll be on the menu. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I appreciate you. Oh, did you say it earlier?
I said it earlier.
I don't know.
I attributed to you. Amen. We thank God. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate you so much. We know some of you have yet a meal before you on tonight, and we want to encourage you in that regard. President of the State Baptist Convention, will you give us the benediction? Reverend Dr. Ronnie Patterson.
When you're hungry, whether you're Baptist or Kojic or PEW or Full Gospel, Lord, thank you for tonight. Amen.
Okay. Thank you all for coming. We're going to keep this work up. We'll keep you informed. I hope you have all. Oh, and there are also some rapid test kits that we have available for you in the back. If you see Sharon, you can have one or more. Yes, Anna.
Hey, how you doing? Hello, how you doing?